on the right side of your screen. Always like us on Facebook if you're on that. We frequently post webinars and other trainings such as this on there. It's just a good way to stay connected to what's happening in Arkansas and all things trauma related. So I've known Kathy for a while now. Kathy Helpenstiel is a faculty member at Harding University, where she teaches in the social work program. She also works very closely with the Child Safety Center of White County. She is a national trauma-focused CBT therapist. She's only one of a handful in our state, so we're very lucky to have her for that. And she also is a forensic interviewer at the White County Child Safety Center. And Kathy has done numerous trainings for child welfare staff and their supervisors, and we're just really happy to have her today to do this presentation. So Kathy, if you want to go ahead, and the webinar is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we're doing today is a little bit, it's going to be a little bit unique, because what I recognize that we have all different levels of experience and history and work with children in different capacities. So I'm going to try to meet a variety of needs through the training. But this is actually a training that I have worked on with for my DCFS workers in trying to understand what it's like to what it's like to be a child in foster care. So you've got your trauma history, you've got your family issues, you've got uncertainty, you've got confusion about the system and when you're going to see your parents again. And so all of these things are really what I'm trying to break down to the workers, because in their massive, busy caseload, it's just easy to see the kid as a label. And some of you have high caseloads, and some of you have times in your experience when children become a label as well. So I want to sort of just take an hour or 50 minutes or however long it takes to just sort of break down some of these insides of what goes on through the eyes of a child. So this presentation was originally named Through the Eyes of Trauma. And so that's really kind of where we want to go today. And I'm going to be a little bit more all over the place, because I want to speak to y'all's level of expertise, but also educate you guys on where these children are in the DCFS system. I'm going to share with you some of the policies and some of the issues that come up that you may or may not have familiarity with or experience with the DCFS policy system. And so on this slide, we're just seeing a variety of kids and how we all experience trauma a little bit different. So we know that no two children are alike. We know that in the history of mankind, we've never had two of the same DNAs. And so we all process experiences and understanding and language and culture and values and beliefs differently. And so all of these children on this particular slide, have different types of homes, different types of parents, different types of discipline, income, social support, education, ideas, values, beliefs, and traditions. And so we all have different rules and roles in life. Some of these are older children, some are middle children, some are younger children. Some of them have a different perception or understanding or translation of activities. And so it's just really important that we can look at statistics and we can read statistics. And I teach a child welfare class here at Harding University. So I teach university students about the system And when I say the system, I'm talking about DCFS and law enforcement and mental health and all of those processes that the children go through. It's really easy to get into statistics and research that say, children that have been abused are more likely to be aggressive and have problems in school, and they may have enuresis or encopresis, or they may have stomach aches or headaches, they may have anxiety, they may have withdrawal. We read all of this stuff, and what I like to say to my students is what do they not have, okay? I mean, like, they're all prone to have all of these different risk factors, but so is everybody else, and how are they different? And so I think that's my point is I want us to step away from the research that so-and-so percent will, be held back in school, and this percentage of kids will have trauma symptoms, and this percentage of kids will have trouble sleeping. All of that's true, and all of that's relevant, and I don't want to discredit any of that, but what I want to do is I want to take a moment to look behind the eyes of the specific child that's in front of you on your caseload. So, 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, that child that's sitting in front of you, that's wedged between your 9 o'clock and your 11 o'clock, how do we differentiate between that child's individual needs? And again, this is a real issue for DHS because they're running in crisis mode all the time, and they have crises and fires they're putting out. They don't really see themselves as having time to look at the child as an individual person with individual feelings, levels of understanding, and that's really where it's crisis conditioning, but it's also not helpful. So in the words of Tony Manarino, just because it's accurate doesn't mean it's helpful, and so we want to make it meaningful. The NCTSN talks about making meaning out of your trauma, and that's kind of where I just want us to take a little time out today at lunch to make some meaning out of things. So all of these are different things, and some of these are going to be real common to you because of your history or because of your training and your education, but we know that everybody is a piece of a puzzle. Like, all of the pieces of the puzzle of our life experiences. Did we have a two-parent home? Did we have a one-parent home? Did we have low socioeconomic? Did we move 10 times, or have we been in the same house our whole life? Did we live in the South? Did we live in the rural? Did we live in the city? Did we go to a big school or a small school or a medium school? Were we popular or not popular? Everything that you can possibly think of are all factors in what makes up who we are and how we see people. So not only are we dealing with the child and the way they see people, we're also looking through a lens of our own life experiences that sort of drive our own perception and awareness train of what we expect people to feel like or to be like, or we expect them to respond to whatever experiences happen. So we assume a lot of times and interpret oftentimes wrongly. We assume what a child may be experiencing, or we assume what a child of sexual abuse is dealing with or processing. We assume what the mom will or will not do as far as being protective or not protected. And so today's training is going to have a lot of research, evidence-based, because that's good and that's helpful and that's necessary, but it's also going to break it down to where we are with that specific child. So we can look at all of these pictures that we've seen already, and we can make some assumptions, and we can make some ideas of what that looks like. But all of you should be familiar with this slide that we have here, that within the eyes of a child, this is the system of a child. So we could make several more bubbles, and we could add a whole lot of other factors. We could put, you know, education on here. We could put but anyway, the cartoon about your feelings, and you have these stored memories, and some are good memories and some are core memories and all of those things. Some of these are stored cognitively, some of these are physical, some of these are, you know, thinking, beliefs, ideas, values, culture, but they all sort of fit into different bubbles, and so we want to break some of these down. So if we're looking at these domains, let me just go back for just a second. The reason I chose these specific domains is because when a DHS worker is doing intake, so, you know, we've had an investigation, the investigation is found true, it rolls over to a caseworker to open the case and to work the case. We have to do what is called either a CANS or a FAST. And this is an assessment. It's sort of the psychosocial. Y'all do your own psychosocial. DHS does their own psychosocial history. And what DHS calls their psychosocial history is if it's a protective service case, which means that the child remained in the home, it's called a FAST. If the child has been removed and is placed in foster care, then it's a different psychosocial history, and it's called the CANS. So that's some differentiation right there between the two different agencies, or the two psychosocial information gathering tools. So what we want to make that differentiation and understand that a FAST is much smaller. It has a few components, much less. But if a child is removed and in the system, quote unquote, in the system, then the psychosocial is going to be much more complex, much more elaborate. We're going to look for much more history, and it's going to be much more extensive. So these bubbles on this slide are just headings or ideas that go into a FAST, which is not quite as complex as the CANS. I just want to remind you, I know that we can't converse back and forth, so I'm going relatively quickly, but you also have the opportunity to ask lots of questions, like Chad talked about, in that field over on your right. So if you have any questions that you'd like for me to clarify or address at the end of the slide, then you can type them in, and Chad will collect those and send those in. So, so one of our components is physical symptoms. We don't really want to address necessarily physical abuse, although that is one of them. But what I like to ask DHS workers when they're doing their assessment, I like to ask kids, I want them to really look at the kid, look into their eyes, look at them and say, where are their scars? What scars are visible? What scars are not visible? What parts of this child feels broken? So if there's sexual abuse, they might feel broken in a religious perspective of purity, or they might feel broken if they have an STI, which kind of goes into the disease mode, which STI is sexually transmitted infection. So we have some scars that are visible or invisible. We have some brokenness physically or emotionally, whether they're visible or not visible. We have some possible diseases. We have enuresis or encopresis, and that can be an issue in bedtime or daytime at school. It can be an issue with fear and anxiety. You know all of these things. But just because a child doesn't have enuresis or encopresis doesn't mean that they're not traumatized. It's just a symptom. And I would want to clarify all of this for DHS, that you can't hang your hat on all of this because, again, children are different. But those kids that have the belly aches, or they have the headaches, or they have the sore throat, or they don't feel like going to school because they just don't feel good, or they have chronic fatigue, or they have all of these things, we want to address not only the visible issues, but the invisible issues that might not be as apparent. But these are all just issues that would be on the CANS and the FAST as an assessment tool, and I know that on your psychosocial, you probably address all of these as well. So we're just going to kind of move on from that. So cognitively, we want to know, like, are they delayed in school, and what bearing that has on their functioning. So I come in contact with so many kids who as a forensic interviewer, I might say, oh, you're 11 years old. What grade does that make you in? Because you absolutely don't want to assume that well, they're in the 11th grade, they're 11 years old, so that puts them in the 5th or the 6th grade. You want them to be able to tell you. And invariably, anytime I say to a child, tell me about your school, or tell me about what grade you're in, they always will say, if they have been held back, I'm supposed to be in the 7th grade, but I'm in the 5th grade. Tell me about that. Well, I have a late birthday, and then we moved around so many times I didn't get to complete such and so grade or whatever. So really not just writing on a sheet of paper, this is an 11-year-old child in the 5th grade, but saying what that perception is. What is their perception of what grade they should be in, or they want to be in, or do they feel broken because they are behind? And if they've had 12 moves, even in foster care, even if they're in the system and they've been bumped around from relative or shelter or residential or any of these different categories of types of foster care, how many times have they changed schools? And if they've changed schools that many times, can you really learn algebra and geometry if you're not having some consistency? So, like, I'm not math-minded. That's just one of my weaknesses. And I don't know, I can't really learn algebra, chemistry, physical science, all of those things, if my spirit and my consistency, my brain is freed up to accept new information and stretch in those capacities. So what I see is a lot of times kids are dropping out of school, or they're getting their GED, and they really stunted their ability maybe to move on to secondary school because of frequency of moves or trauma that has limited their capacity to retain things or learn grammar or proficiency, feel confident about their reading skills, some of those things. And so my charge to a DCFS worker is, don't just find out what grade they're in. Find out how many times they've moved schools. Find out how many, what their reading level is. Find out what their testing levels are. What is their perception about schools? What do they feel strong about school? What do they not feel strong about school? And this is one of those issues that is in the CANS and the FAST. They actually ask the question, child's perception of school. Do they feel engaged, and is it a retreat where they feel supported and loved, and they get 2 meals a day, they get a lot of attention from their teacher, and they get a lot of social normalcy at school? Or does school feel like it's an additional burden? Is it a place of isolation? Is it a place of further stigma because you're the foster kid and you've got a foster parent? Is it a place where they don't belong because they don't have a network of friends that's established? So really, we want to ask open-ended questions, narrative questions that say, tell me about school. Do you like it? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What are you great at? What is interesting to you about school? What is not interesting to you, or what is a challenge? Let's talk about those challenges and where those challenges come from. And so I think that's getting further behind the eyes or the heart of a child is not just recorded. Express their needs, their fears, their wants, their challenges, then you've got a high risk of them just shutting down altogether and saying, you know what, school's hard, I hate it, it sucks, I'm out. And then they can cognitively check out. But if they feel like that this is what they success or they excel in, then this is a tool that we're going to come back to later in the webinar that we can enrich their tribe, their social network, their social skills. So if we've had a lot of issues with trauma, or if we've had a lot of issues with devaluing education or devaluing resources or delays, if we've had a culture of it doesn't matter if we go to school or not, parents not getting them to school on time, and parents' ambivalence, if that's the culture, the norms, ideas, and values, then that's something that we have to address and deal with early to overcome some of those barriers to future learning and future ability to be safe. If a child doesn't have the language to be safe, then it's going to be hard to intervene and help them as a therapist, as a DCFS worker, as a forensic interviewer, as law enforcement. If they don't understand or have words, then it's going to put them at risk, at a greater risk for future abuse, future child sex trafficking, future fallout, lack of resources. All of those are going to just be risk factors and indicators for future challenges. So again, if you have any questions or clarifications, you can add those. So a lot of what I've already said is just going to bleed over here into child development. If the child has a lack of understanding of abuse, spanking, punishment, or if their abuse was rewarded or positively sanctioned, then their understanding of it being wrong may not be there. So I had a little girl that was in DCFS custody who was made to stand in the center of her bedroom for hours and hours and hours. And they didn't spank her or use physical abuse, but they did a lot of tormenting of her by putting hot sauce in her food or withholding food and killing her pet animal. And they always attached it to her being a bad girl and her being a liar and things like that. And so if that's what your norm is, then we have to understand that she doesn't have the same visual perspective of or worldview than anybody else does. So for us to say, you know, tell us about discipline or tell us about whatever, she may have some shame and guilt about that. It may not want to talk about it, not have words for it. So lacking the words to disclose thoughts, feelings, or needs. And of course, if you're in TFCBT, you know the value of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and working to hone those skills. DHS workers don't have trauma TFCBT experience, so they are sort of disconnected from these ideas that we as the professionals need to help the students or the children put words or be able to describe thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and needs. This is a thing that I feel like you guys can help DCFS do. So communication, and I know some of you really, really, really do try to do, and that you don't get a lot of support communicating with DHS, but helping DHS understand what the child thinks, believes, ideas, values, all of those things. So sharing your psychosocial, if appropriate, with the worker adds better understanding and better light to what that child's needs are and what's going on. A lot of times we have, and I'm going to talk about this more in just a few slides, but a lot of times we have children that come to the safety center, somebody reports some abuse, the child goes to an advocacy center and they're forensically interviewed, and the child won't disclose anything, but we have evidence. So maybe we have medical evidence, maybe we have video evidence, maybe we have witness evidence, and the child absolutely won't disclose anything. Maybe it's because they lack the words or the understanding about what's wrong or right. So our DHS, investigation, law enforcement, all of their hands are tied as far as what they can do about it because there's not a disclosure. Yeah, they may have some evidence, but it may not be consistent, it may be marginal, it may not be enough. So what invariably ends up happening over and over again is that everybody says, well, let's get them into therapy and maybe they'll disclose to the therapist. I'm sure y'all have seen that play out over and over and over again. So that kind of puts you in a pickle that you're now a new investigator. And I'm going to let you off the hook, and I'm going to say you're not. That's not your role. Part of this training for DCFS is to say it's not the therapist's role to be an investigator. We don't want you to do that. We don't need you to do that. But what we need for you to do is help children understand thoughts, feelings, and needs. We need you to provide a safe environment and some trust that helps them understand the need to talk about what's happened, understanding of important and significant norms of this is okay, but this is not okay. Like children and adults don't have these types of relationships. Maybe they've never heard that before. And so boundaries, relationship identification, understanding of norms, and giving them safety and security that teaches them what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and that they're okay, they're not broken, all of those things. You guys know that. DHS doesn't always know that. And so if a child in that process of learning to disclose thoughts, feelings, or needs, understanding roles in a relationship, understanding of importance and significance of things, in that process, if they feel safe to disclose things to you, then great. Call it into the hotline. That's what we need to help intervene for that child and keep that child safe. But that's not your primary role. Okay? So that's part of my job as a therapist and as a DCFS trainer, is to ride that fence, both sides of the fence, and say, I know you need more information that you can't get, or you need more cooperation from a kid, but you're a stranger. They're not going to talk about it because they don't know you, they don't trust you. The mom's given them some norms and some values about law enforcement and about DCFS, but hopefully they can get what they need from you in the meantime. Also, a lot of times we have aha moments with these children where what they thought was going on with an adult, either physical or sexual or emotional abuse, what they thought at one point was a norm, and they have it coded in their memory as a norm, and it was okay, and this is just the way life is. Once they start learning, or once they have exposure to other families, other situations, foster parents, social situations of maturity and cognitive development, they sort of have these aha moments that's like, wait a minute, you mean that wasn't okay? I had forgotten that happened, because I thought it was my fault, or I thought I'd forgotten that happened because I didn't understand. Confusing and disturbing thoughts, ideas, beliefs, or memories. And so DHS and a therapist, psychosocial, asks a question about history one day during intake or during the cans and the fast. Let's fast forward, a year, 9 months later, they have that aha moment. That psychosocial is probably not going to be rewritten, and the cans and the fast is probably not going to be rewritten. And so we have to figure out ways that we can add that piece of the puzzle to that child's worldview lens, because it's important and it's significant to address and to help them make new meaning of it. So we're not going to really spend a whole lot of time on this because this is more of the same, but socially, I just like to bring up the term stigma. And if we identify or define the word stigma, what is that one thing that makes you different from everybody else? Is it the label of being a survivor? Is it the label of being a victim? Is it being or wanting to be clean and not feeling clean, like labels like virgin or not virgin, or tramp or not tramp, or prostitute or hoe, or all of these words and these labels that people like to put on children or people. And so not the labels that we know, like 11-year-old fifth grader, Caucasian, or African American, male, female, all of these things that are visual. We have to look at the visual scars, but we also have to look at the labels that they place on themselves and their perspective of how other people label them. And those are issues to be addressed. So you guys know that, and I know that you know that. So that's really not where I want to go with this on this slide. What I want to go with you guys on this slide is that we have to understand, identify what those labels are and how they become pieces of the puzzle. If we don't ask them to make a list of their labels, then how do we know them, and how can we modify or correct cognitive distortions? And so ask yourself, with some of your kids on your caseload, especially foster children or kids that are involved with the system, when's the last time you asked them about their perception of themselves? And how do other people see them, or what's their perception of the way that people perceive them? If they have a label of DHS, foster kid, or I don't have any parents, or I'm up for adoption, or what does all of that feel like to them? And let's add those pieces of the puzzle, because if we don't ask, we don't know. Okay, obviously you guys are experts on behavioral issues, and knowing that the children of the system have behavioral issues. But whenever I'm giving this talk to DHS workers, I like to remind them that everybody's got different DNA, and there's an entire spectrum of kids that will internalize or act out. There are no clear markers or predictors on what kid's going to do what. So it would be really convenient, and this is a joke, but it would be really convenient if we had red dots on our forehead or red dots on our ears that said, this child acts out, or this child internalizes. This is a type A personality or type B personality, or if we could see a star, or, you know, if it was all visual and we knew the thumbprint, we could scan a thumbprint and say, oh, this kid does this, this, or this. This kid has trouble sleeping, or this kid has trouble with enuresis or encaprices. Or it would be nice if we could scan and know what their coping skills are, and we could address them very easily. But trying to identify behavior patterns, how long have they been in their placement? Are they still in the honeymoon phase, or are they having new and emerging behaviors? What is the preceptor of the behavior? Kind of what goes on. And so again, it'd be easy just to say, well, this is an ADHD kid, this is an ODD kid, this is a kid with autism, this is a kid that is non-compliant. It would be really easy just to slap on a whole bunch of markers in your documentation, but what's behind that diagnosis, what's behind that behavior, what are they cognitively thinking and feeling, the cognitive triangle, what are they thinking and feeling that leads to the behavior, and how can we restructure that? And so what I hear from DHS a lot of times, more times than it just makes me cringe all the time, is when they take kids into care or they open a case and they're like, oh, that kid is fine, he didn't cry, he just picked up his suitcase and he got in the car. Well, just because he didn't cry doesn't mean that he's not traumatized. Maybe he's internalizing. Maybe he's panicked into a catatonic state. Not really, but maybe. I mean, maybe they are avoidant. Maybe they're doing the avoidance. Maybe they're in denial and all of those things. And so we have to kind of look at what's behind what's being said and being behaviorally acted out, but also what's not. So I'm going to really kind of fast forward some of these to kind of deal with some bigger things. We're running out of time. But emotionally and psychologically, sometimes kids are compliant and cooperative in the therapeutic setting. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. And so what makes a child compliant or open or disclosing, participating in the therapeutic process? Maybe they are having some secrecy issues. Maybe they were conditioned and treated to be secret. They've been bribed or manipulated by the offender, and maybe they don't want to get their offender in trouble. I had a girl this week that had to go inpatient because when she found out that her offender was arrested, she was so mortified and so upset that she emotionally completely shut down and wanted to die. She wanted to report. She wanted therapeutic services to deal with what had happened to her. She's 14 years old, and what happened to her when she was 5, but she did not want her offender to get in trouble. And so when that happened and he was arrested, she couldn't handle it. So that's obviously an emotional, psychological contradiction of her not participating in therapy or not participating in law enforcement and the DHS case protective services because she feels like she's already caused too much trouble. So secrecy is a big issue, and sometimes families want to deal with all of their issues independently and privately. But here is the accommodation, and some of you are familiar with this and some of you are not. And if I were going to say that anything was the most important, this would be the most important slide of everything that we've talked about or I've talked about. And so if you can get your hands on this article by Roland Summit and talking about the Accommodation Syndrome, it will do you great service to be familiar with survival behavior and why children don't admit it, don't disclose, why they don't cooperate, why they accommodate their offender or their family or their values. Important for the caregivers as it is to understanding the dynamics of trauma through the system as it is the child themselves. So they might have been abused over and over and over and over and over again by a parent, but in their mind they're trying to reconcile what's happened into spiritual or cultural beliefs or traditions or values, and what ends up happening is, because that's the only parent that they have, so it's loyalty, it's safety, it's security, it's all of these things that they try to accommodate to find their norm. And so just because they don't want it to happen doesn't mean that they want to be away from their abusers. So I strongly encourage you, if you're not familiar with this theory and these ideas, it can change your perspective of why kids go back, why kids have some distorted beliefs about safety and reality about abuse, and why it's hard to change some of those values and beliefs is because of accommodation and entrapment. And so when we understand this, we quit blaming the victim and the parent. We quit being mad at the parent for maybe compromising their beliefs or their support of the abusive child. Not that we're excusing it, but we're recognizing the accommodation. Then we can work with that accommodation, and we can undo some of those distortions, and we can challenge some of those distortions, but at the same time recognizing where those distortions are coming from and how vital of a puzzle piece of the child that they are. And so when we talk about accommodation syndrome, the stronger the relationship, the more difficult it is to disclose or to seek help or to participate in therapy, because it's internalized. If it's a stranger that offends them or makes them feel unsafe or uncomfortable, it's much more externalized, and they're more likely to go running and tell, oh my gosh, I'm scared, this is what happened. If it's a caretaker like a mom, or if it's a stepfather that's now made a girlfriend-boyfriend relationship with his stepdaughter, and they're going to get married and they're engaged and all of that, then again, we're accommodating. We have some distorted beliefs, some cognitive distortions that are much more challenging hurdles to overcome because of the relationship. So this is just better understanding of why they will or won't work in therapy, or they will or work in DCFS custody, or what their pieces of the puzzle and perception are. So all of these are obviously factors that we look at, severity factors of how severe was the abuse, how frequent was the abuse, what was the duration of the abuse, force, what type of abuse was it, and when was the last occurrence. So I told you just now about a girl who's 14 who was offended on when she was 5, and she's been carrying that for 9 years, and she just cannot let go of it. She accommodated her relationship with her offender and her family cultural beliefs and traditions and structure. She accommodated all of that for so many years. And so even though it was a one-time thing, 9 years ago, it's driven her to the point that she's suicidal, and she has to have a lot of new traumas of her loved one going to jail and the blame and the guilt for all of that, even though no one has put her in that position and no one has challenged that. It is a challenge that she's put upon herself, and so a huge obstacle to overcome. So we cannot assume because it happened this time or this time or this time or this time or this many times or this many times, one time versus, so it must not be that bad. This is what DHS and law enforcement tends to do, is they categorize and they say, well, it only happened one time and it was only digital penetration, and so they're probably okay. My job is to say, we can't say that. It's only one piece of the bigger picture. And so when we tend to say, well, she's probably not that traumatized, until we ask those questions and we do the assessment, we don't know. So I've kind of addressed some of this already, and you guys have all been through TFCBT, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But for DCFS, this is an important part of the training, is to just constantly put PTSD and trauma back in their forefront of their brains and making them aware of that. And then fear, powerlessness, and helplessness, these are all indicators of the abuse, and these are going to inhibit their ability to disclose or participate in therapy because of fear, because of powerlessness or helplessness. And so again, this is more of the Accommodation Syndrome by Summit, 1983. That's the same article. And then Finkelhor and Brown has a separate article, and it's called the Traumagenic Model. And so they're different, but they reinforce each other, and extremely good reads, even despite the age of those things. So I would strongly, strongly ask you or encourage you to read those two and use those two articles as resources. So I want to wrap this up. So now that we kind of know what the child of the system of a child of the system, we want to know now what? Well, CANS and FAST and DCFS is going to also look at community partners. They're going to look at community resources, and they're going to look for community support. So part of the domains in the CANS and the FAST assessment tool is identifying support systems. So we're looking at soccer coaches, we're looking at youth ministers, we're looking at football coaches or art teachers and Boy Scout, Girl Scout leaders. We're looking at anybody. If we're removing a child from their home and their family and their cultural system, what can we give them back? How can we engage their community? Who's their tribe? Let's help identify a tribe. If the child doesn't have a voice or awareness to know who their people are, it's our job to help identify who those people are and how to engage them. And so they may feel like their support systems are their perpetrators. We have to help them overcome that and find healthy support systems. Therapy is great. Therapy is wonderful, but therapy is time limited. So in the process of therapy, if we can help identify hobbies, interests, things that give them a sense of self-worth, a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging, talent, and skills, then we've given them a lifetime tool. We've engaged them in something that is positive and meaningful. That may be math and science and chemistry in high school, may not be. It may be skateboarding or art or football or taekwondo or something like robotics. We have to ask and flesh out all of these things so we know where we can go in helping that child have ownership of something that they can hang on to for the rest of their life. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's guitar lessons or piano lessons. Any of those things that help community connections and that can help that's what we got. And recovery needs, that's a whole different thing. I don't want to, we're running out of time, so I feel like as a recovery need, we have to understand and ensure the sense of safety. We have to try to neutralize the pressure of the process of any investigations or prosecutions or things that are going on. And we have to give children the need to grow. And I've addressed all of that whenever I said, you know, your role is not to be an investigator. Your role is to help children be where they are and identify where they are. And so I like that last little question or point, is giving children room to be where they are in the process of the moment, their developmental stage, their developmental resources, their grade, their academics, wherever they are. So, questions, concerns, thoughts?
Well, thanks, Kathy. We do have a couple of questions that came up while you were presenting, so if you'd like to ask questions for Kathy, just be sure to type those in. So the first question, Kathy, is, will participants be able to get a copy of this presentation?
I'm fine with that. I would actually like for you to have that. And Chad, can you do that? Can you facilitate that?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
And
yeah, I think
another. Okay. Another question is could you spell out the DCFS assessments, the CANS and the FAST? Like, what do those stand for? Some folks had questions about that.
That's a really good question that I should know. CANS is Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths. Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths. The FAST, I believe, has to do with family. I'm not sure. I know that it's more focused on the family as a unit, so I'll have to get those definitions for you.
Okay, and I can pass those along too in an email, as well as the article you suggested about the Accommodation Syndrome from Summit in 1983.
Sure.
Folks kind of requested that. So usually after webinars, I follow up with participants and resources that were shared.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question. This again has to kind of, I guess, do with the DCFS assessment. So you mentioned about a therapist sharing or helping out with their biopsychosocial assessment, but what does that look like for the therapist to get access to the CANS or the FAST, or how does that work? Can they get access? I'm trying to summarize the question.
No, I got you. And I think that that's a fantastic question. I'm glad you asked, because technically, DCF policy says that the CANS and the FAST is a shared document. It is part of the policy that says that therapists should be given a copy of the CANS and the FAST. I mean, all the way up to the central office, I train in the CANS and the FAST. And so all of the verbiage that I get is that this is a shared document, and this is part of a treatment team plan. And so I believe that if you want it, you ask for it, and they should give it to you. They should be giving it to you anyway, but a lot of times people, when they have their staffing, therapists get sort of left out of that equation, and that's okay or not okay, but all you have to do to be added as a participant is to ask. And if you're not getting results, you're not getting responses, which happens occasionally as well, you just go ahead and, call their supervisor or email their supervisor and say, I would like a copy of this. And you might get a modified copy if there's confidential information, such as history information that the parents don't want to share. So we've talked about that being an issue, but you should be able to have access to most of that information. I'm sure that there would be exceptions in some occasions, some instances, but overall, the DCFS policy says that it is a shared document.
All right, great. So hopefully that's helpful for folks. Let me see here. Okay, so I think that, again, this has to kind of do with the DCFS assessment. What about for a child who, or I guess a family who has child welfare history involvement? Are they typically just redoing the FAST, or are they redoing the CANS, or is that just dependent on each investigation or each time? I think this person
Yes.
is trying to, they've, 2 years ago, yeah, they also had an open case, and so I think that's kind of where they're going with that.
Right. Yes, you're exactly right, and that's a really good question. So ideally, best practice would say that they would completely start all over again, and they would start, do a fresh example, because the CANS and the FAST is supposed to be a living, evolving document. Anytime there is a change or a modification or development, that should change. They should update it. It should always be ongoing development. So not that actually does happen, but that's the idea. The FAST stands for Family Advocacy and Support Tool.
Okay, thank you.
So CANS stands for, you want to go ahead and do that? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know we're kind of getting towards the top of the hour. If you're interested in receiving a CEU, the code is displayed on the screen, as well as my email. It's really helpful if you tell me your first and last name. That just makes searching the attendance log a lot easier. So go ahead, Kathy.
So just to reiterate and summarize, the CAN stands for Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths. FAST stands for Family Advocacy and Support Tool. And the FAST is for a protective service case, and the CANS is for a foster care case. And so hopefully the goal is that these are evolving living documents, but that's not always the case, unfortunately. Best practice says that. Reality sometimes indicates differently.
All right. Okay, well, last call for questions from the group, and if you think of a question afterwards, you can feel free to email me, and I can connect you with Kathy. So we'll kind of hang on here for about 30 seconds or so, and thanks everyone for coming out today, and hopefully you'll join us in May for our webinar. We don't have a date yet, but we'll be sending that out soon. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, I don't think we're getting any more questions, Kathy, so we'll go ahead and end the webinar, and I'll leave the slide up for folks to copy down that CEU information.
All right, thanks so much.